Okay guys, so more stuff on MODO Drum. Now one thing I really like about MODO Drum is the way that you can achieve a sort of completely raw state for the drums. And I love that because it gives you absolute control over how you mix the drums. So what I've got is a MODO Drum here. I started with the Yamaha kit. I'm only using the kick. I've changed everything else apart from the cymbals. But I'm actually just using the kick, the hi-hat and the snare for this. It's just a reggae one drop. Now, if we go to the mixer, yes, these mixer channels can work as mixer channels. You can do a complete mix inside MODO Drum with processing effects, send and return effects, EQ on every channel, etc. But other than that, you can think of these channels as simply the routing of each individual drum. That's what they are. So at the bottom of every channel, you can route them to DAW outputs. And MODO Drum can be configured with different output, mono outs, stereo outs, half and half, etc. So I've got it set up with 16 stereo outs. Now, when you're working in multiple out mode to your DAW, the master is output 1, 2, the same DAW channel that the actual plugin sits on. So I've got my kick on master, output 1, 2, and everything else is going to separate outs. And of course, or by the way, your overhead and room channels can go to your DAW, so can your effects returns, and any created buses can go to your DAW as well. Okay, so I've got it set like that. Now that therefore allows me to do all my processing, EQing and mixing on my board in my DAW. But I'll turn everything off. I'm just using some compression and EQ. I'll turn everything off, right? And now I can listen to MODO Drum in a completely raw state. And to me it sounds just so raw and realistic. I've got this is my overheads here. If I bring those right down, listen to just the close mics. And that's what I like about it. It's just so damn raw. I mean, it just sounds to me, if I close my eyes, like I'm sitting in a backstreet studio listening to the close mic kick and snare and hats coming off a board. It's just incredible. And that's that. I love that rawness. Okay. So now I can start to do it. Here's the overheads, and of course, like the snare is very, very realistic sound, close mic, but with snares, the sort of wood cracked sort of frequency content tends to come more from the overhead. So if we bring this up, and we've got our room as well, sorry, our overheads as well. I've also got the room here, but I'm not using any room really. Okay, so that's this kind of rawness that I really like. So then I can process it myself. Now for the kick drum here, I am using Logic's own Pultec emulation. IK Multimedia also do a superb Pultec emulation. So what I'm doing there is I'm doing a push-pull at the bottom end of the kick really deep at 30 Hz, and then adding some 6 or it could be 5K up at the top to give it a bit of that clicky edge at the top, right? The mid section's out completely. So I'm EQing like that, and then I'm using IK Multimedia's LA2A clone here. I just love this compressor. It's just fantastic, and it's just something you've got to gain, and the amount of reduction. That's your lot, and limit compress, slightly different character. So I've got this on the kick with the tube EQ. Right, and then for my snare I'm using again the LA2A clone, and I'm using Logic's regular channel EQ. And what I'm doing is, you come back here. What I'm doing is I'm actually really thinning the snare out, taking the bottom end, dipping it down with a low shelf below 500 Hz, ish. I mean, the center frequency is 158, but it starts rolling off at 500 hertz and giving it some top end boost. I wanted a very thin sort of snare for this. Like that. Okay. The difference in sound with EQ out is staggering. Just give me that sound. That's the sound I want, because you're not hearing it with the reverb in yet. And the hats. Where are my hats? Here. I should have labelled everything. There's my hats. And with the hats, I'm doing typical reggae thing. I'm ultra thinning out the hats, taking all the body out and just listening to the top end sizzle. And I've got a bit of compression on that as well. Okay, and then the whole lot. But it's still got that incredible rawness. Take the overheads down. And that is what I love about it. It's just so damn raw. That to me, it's the nearest thing I've ever heard. I mean, from a piece of software, right? Not some incredibly detailed sample set. That's the nearest thing I've ever heard to like a real drum kit. I could be sitting in a studio now just listening to a kit. And then I can bring in my other stuff. Let's move this out of the way. Let's put it back to here. So what I've got is I've got an auxiliary send coming off the snare. Well, I mean, it's on every channel, but I've got it coming off the snare. And that is going to my Boss 1 return here, which has got a spring reverb on. Also, there's a little bit of that being sent from the overheads, which I can adjust to taste. Yeah, that's it. That is it. I've got some on the heights as well, but I can roll it off anytime I like. And there you go. And then I'm just doing a little reggae thing with MODO bass. If you don't know MODO bass, let's just look at the pattern here. MODO bass, it's epic, absolutely epic. If you look at these big notes in each bass pattern, this is a simple bass line that goes from the A to the E string. Now this low note and this low note here, down outside the playing area range, these are control notes that are telling MODO drum to stick to the A string only. In other words, don't jump strings to go up to like the A string or up to the D string or whatever. Just stick on the A string, and then when the pattern changes here, stick on the E string. And then I'm using slides to slide up. So the bass line here goes do 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 do, and there's a slide up do 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 do, boom, like that. And if I put MODO bass into round one strings new, you'll hear that even more. Let me just solo it. Like that kind of thing, right? This is bloody amazing, this. And you can actually see the sliding up and down the A and E string here on the display. You can hear it as well. And also, if you don't know MODO bass, you've got a slide noise control. So I'll just put it back into, I'm using old flat wounds. And of course I can adjust my playing position and everything like that, besides just amp the whole span. This thing is great, but that's my bass. So now with the bass and the drums, we've got a little... And of course, I can go to tweak my snare any way I want, but of course I can also decide what type of stick I'm using and where I'm playing. So when it comes to that fill, I can have the fill more centered, more on the edge, change the tip type, etc. So if I change it to a plastic tip and have it right on the edge, my fill will sound different, but there'll still be a little variation. Yeah, so nice edgy, or put my fill more in the centre. Yeah, and there really is a difference. And if you listen to that over and over and over, you'll hear that with a wider strike area, there'll be subtle variations in that fill. And I'm not even using the right stick for the fill. You know, I could work that in as well. I don't think I am anyway. Am I? No. Nope. I'm just using the left stick only. So I could get even more if I brought in the right stick. Oh, I love this thing. Absolutely epic. And there's my little thing. Little ting-a-ling, yeah? And it just, to me, I mean, that sounds, as I said, like I'm sitting in a studio and I'm listening to the raw drums, and then I've got the ability to do what the hell I like with it. And that's before I even get into the editing of the elements, dampening and tuning and all the rest of it. So then I'm bringing my other stuff. I've got a little bubble organ here, I think. Okay, now I'm getting a more boxy centered. That's because the way I've set everything up as well with the EQ on the snare. I'm cutting out all that bottom end, but with the snare here, I've got it tuned in a particular way and set in a particular way. And if I go to the play style, I'll move that back to the edge, so my fill is going to give me more edgy fill, a bit less stick noise. Let's hear that last fill. Lovely, lovely, lovely. And that to me is as real as you want. I mean, it's just incredible. And it's that rawness. Strip it all back. Strip it all back. And you're left with just the rawness. Turn that bass out. Listen to that, it's just so... It's just so raw. And that I really love. Yes, you can achieve a very good mix inside MODO Drum's mixer, but it's that raw, that utter and total rawness that I love so much about MODO Drum, that I get the choice as an engineer. Now, this may not work for, you know, very young and inexperienced musicians who are trying to get into producing and engineering and all that stuff, because it's not an instant fix, yeah. But for people who are more experienced or want to get into that, you've got the ability here to mix the nearest damn thing to completely raw drums. It's just brilliant. Yeah, that is as raw as you like. Okay, now just to show you something else. Okay, let's look at something else now. What I've got here is I've got a simple kick and snare riff, da da dabble dabble da da dabble dabble, yeah? And it's playing here, same pattern on both tracks, triggering this MODO drum. And this is the Yamaha kit, and I load up the Gent snare. And this is sort of out of the box. I've loaded the Yamaha kit out of the box, I've loaded the Gent snare into it, and it's set with the left stick and everything, you know, the playing style absolutely default out of the box, everything's center hit, the teardrop wood stick with the volume hardly up at all, and I haven't in any way edited the drum. It's out of the box, and on the mixer all I've done is taken the room down, right? So I get this. Right, now switch to this one here, where I've taken the exact same kit, Yamaha kit with the gent snare, but I've modified it. So with the gent snare, oh, come on. With the gent snare, what I'm doing is I'm not using any top head at all. You hear it still, you hear the overtones of it. If you listen to the tuning, so you hear the resonant decay of the head, but you're not getting the strike of the head. So I'm listening only to the bottom head and the top head resonance, both together. I'm damping the top head as well. Then I've got the drum reduced to its smallest size and depth. I've got the large wires on it at half tension and just a bit of overheads, right? And it's a completely different snare. On top of that, I'm hitting it close to the rim rather than centered. Yeah, which gives me a more edgy. Using the nylon tip sticks at full volume, so you hear the tip noise a lot. And that gives me a totally different snare sound to this one. I'll just switch between them. And it's not a case of it just is the same snare tuned up. It goes beyond that, because we're listening to the bottom head, different diameter. It's not just that I've tuned it right up, but I've got a smaller drum. I've changed the edge, etc. Yeah, and then for the kick, I'm using almost no back head at all, no beta head. I'm using all front head, and I've reduced the depth. And I've set it to rounded for the rim edge, which affects the tone of the resonance, etc. So my kick is different again. And for the playing style, I'm just it's just straight. I'm just using the felt beat with heel up, right? Okay, fair enough. But that gives me a completely different kick as well. Make this bigger depth. Get more mid-tone in the resonance of the front head, etc. So, you know, just with that, before you get into mixing at all, there is some compression on the snare. And I think this is on the main kit, the one that hasn't been tweaked, and there's a bit of send going out to this inverse reverb, which is giving a little bit of sort of buff to the snare, but I've turned that right down to make it a little bit more raw. On this one, I've got some inverse reverb actually inserted on the channel, right? Using overhead only, a little bit of overhead. The effect sends are both turned down. So a little bit of that inverse reverb on this one, on my modified one. Well, no, if I turn it up, yeah, that's just giving that little bit of edge. Very subtle amount. The compressor's off, and I'm just using a bit of parametric EQ at 200 Hz boost with some low pass. No, it's off. The low pass is off. But it's a shelf, so I'm just giving a bit of low shelf boost. Take that off and you hear more of the ring, and you can hear the snare wires wobbling a bit more, right? Oh, let's go back here, choose snare. Hear that? Wow, wow, wow. Let's go into the pattern, just take out the kicks. Yeah, great stuff. So it's completely different, totally different. Totally different. As is the kick. And it's not just about everything I've done here. Okay, it's not, I've just changed the shell size, tuned it differently. I'm hardly getting any, I'm just getting the resonance from the top head, but very dampened, and the resonance from the bottom head loud. But it's also about the play style for the snare, that I'm doing edge shots, and it'll have some variety in it, with a lot of tip noise. And all that is slightly, you know, it's slightly different to what you get to get that from a sample-based set, where you're going to have, okay, a sample-based set, you'll have to have all the layers for the velocity, things like the resonance and stuff, and the difference between top and bottom head. Well, you could adjust that. Obviously, that can be adjusted with, you know, by having recordings on each sample velocity layer of bottom and top head and adjusting their relative levels. Damping can be achieved with envelopes, things like that. Tuning, right? Tuning the sample up and down, etc., etc. But you know, to get things like whether it's played at the edge, whether it's played in the center, the consistency of those hits in one area on a tight circle or a wider circle. Tip noise. Well, tip noise could be brought in probably using a very, very, very tight parametric EQ tuned into the tip frequencies, which you can boost or cut. In the background, it'll just say tip noise, and you turn it up or down or whatever. Change the tip type would slightly shift the frequency that's being boosted. And for this edge thing, the nearer you move it to the edge, well, I suppose you could have the sound of the edge of the rim layered in, and that gets raised or lowered the nearer you move it to the edge, etc., etc. But it's a lot of, the way that you can do it all here, and it's modelled, is, to my mind, very, very bloody clever. So just one more time between the two. And that really doesn't sound like the same kick and snare, just simply tuned differently. Yeah, that's just sort of kind of like two different extremes from one snare. But of course, you've got all those snares to choose from. Just in terms of the snare, then it's the same with the kicks and the toms and everything else. There's just this variety which you can then further mess with all the edit element parameters and the play style tip, where it's being hit, etc. All that makes a huge difference to how the snare or any other drum responds. And that's what I like about it. It's that rawness, that you can get into the rawness before you even get to processing. Because, you know, anybody can chuck you a multi-layered sample collection that's been recorded in a really top studio with really high quality mics and through very high quality processors and preamps and all the rest of it. Yeah, you know, anyone can do that, but what I like about this is the rawness, the absolute and complete rawness. Yeah, you can load a kit out of the box and just quickly tweak it, and you've got sort of instant gratification, but it's this ability to get in and really work things and then send it to separate DAW outputs and then do your processing. You know, if you want to go beyond the excellent range of stuff that's available in the internal mixer. Yeah, that to me is a very important thing about this instrument. Still loving it, Still finding out more things. Okay, hope that's useful.